I'm going to speak for about 10 or 15 minutes. And one of the things, I said I started off as an engineer, just to give you a sense of what I do now. I teach courses on green ventures in UCD, as you saw at the beginning. And but I'm really at the edges of academia, so a lot of the ideas that I'm going to come across with today are very much sort of unorthodox or against sort of the orthodoxy. And one way of depicting how I feel was this photograph here, which shows, and oftentimes I find that I'm fighting against my colleagues, I'm fighting against what's in the media, I'm fighting especially against other academic ideas. I wrote a book with a colleague from Austria and America last year, and I thought I'd start off by showing what I think I've learned in 30 or 40 years of teaching and doing research on sort of business. And well, it's a very simple depiction. Hopefully it's profound enough that you'll see what I'm on about. By the way, down at the bottom here, hidden is the purpose or what the objective of business is. And down at the very bottom is education, which I could spend talking for a few hours, but just to show on the left-hand side, when I graduated all those decades ago, we were very much in what I'm calling there the industrial age. And I noticed, by the way, in the last paper, encyclical, the Pope used the word techno-economic paradigm, which I've been using for 20 or 30 years, and I don't think he stole it from me. I probably stole it from him or somebody else. But you can see what I'm putting on the left-hand side. And for people like you who are worked in the real world and work in the real world and survive in the real world, you know these things better than myself. On the left-hand side is very much the sort of the logic that you see a lot of politicians, a lot of my colleagues, if I may say so, in business schools, etc., still use it as the sort of paradigm, which is the purpose of the economy is to make stuff. It doesn't really matter what you make, just make it. And so having something, owning something, is very much the purpose. And you can see down, I won't go through everything, but really the objective then is to grow, and there's actually no limit in many ways. And down, you can see I put the concept of the economy is very much about rights. It's seen as an economist who worked in various economics departments. I fought very hard to try and get my colleagues to change their opinion of what is an economy and how does an economy work. But it's very much still seen as a machine of some sort, so that you increase interest rates and do something and it will respond. But if you look just at this stage on the right-hand side, it's really a wrong way of looking at what's going on in the real world. It's really an organism. It's very much about how things interact with each other. So if you go down further, you'll see that the objective then, thanks very much, of business is to make money, or it's really about money. And underneath that I have, it's not really rooted in life. One of the things I'm very much aware of, and the trend that's going on in business, is very much, it is really about survival now. And I don't mean survival necessarily of business, I mean survival, we know, of the planet and of communities, etc. So the old way of thinking, if you will, I put down at the bottom, is education is really an old, in very many ways it's seen as learning about things. That is, the students sit in the classroom, just like the way I'm kind of talking now, and the teacher or the professor is in some way some sort of an expert, and you're supposed to give them sort of formulas or knowledge of some sort, and then they learn about things and they'll be successful in their lives. It's a sort of a very old way of thinking. It's out of date, and unfortunately it's still the sort of dominant paradigm. But if you look on the right-hand side, and it's very clear to anybody who studies these that what's happening on the right-hand side is really the way the world is moving. So it's very much about, I've used the word regenerative rather than sustainability, which I think is a sort of an old-fashioned word. And it's really about experiences. A lot of the people who spoke today were very much about that. About there's a value now, not so much in the tangible, in the physical, in the actual thing you can touch, but it's in the thing that you can't touch, that's inside ourselves. And you can see underneath that I put something about, that it's really about the story one tells, or the spirit. If you will, it's about the heart rather than the head. And again, going back to what is happening in the political system, is that we still, even though people, I hear, policymakers use terms like research and knowledge-based economy, etc., they're still out of date, I believe, in their approach or in their thinking about what really is of value. And again, you guys know more about these things than myself, but you can see what I put on the right-hand side is very fuzzy. It's about, I said, instead of making stuff, it's really about making sense, about making meaning. That is, that the value is really in, if you see that very much in craft, or in the arts, for example, that the value is in how it affects you inside oneself. So you can see in those other terms down there that really business is much more now, or should be, and is becoming much more about living, if you will, about that life rather than making money. In many ways, as I say to my students after the semester, even though I'm in the banking and finance department, I teach kind of this kind of stuff, but you can see how I don't really fit that well in a banking and finance department. I say to them, what have we been doing for the last 12 weeks? And I usually don't get the answer that I'm looking for, which is that the old way of thinking was that, and you can see it still in a lot of in the business books, is that you sort of make stuff in order to make money and then, as I said, move on. Whereas I say to them, it's actually the opposite. That the most profitable companies are oftentimes the companies that care the least about making a profit. They care about making meaning. And profit comes and money comes because you're doing something that really is of value. And going back to education, or going to education, that learning to be, we're human beings after all, learning to be rather than, as you can see, learning about things is far more important. For example, I don't give exams, I refuse to give exams because going back to the term on the top, excellence, I think the old way of thinking, if you think about it, is that an exam in some way measures or assesses what somebody thinks about you. That is, it's outside the individual, so you set a standard, and the job of the professor or lecturer is in some way to evaluate the student. I try and create an environment where the student himself or herself actually tries to set standards for himself or herself. That is, that it's not good enough for them. That is, to be excellent is in many ways is something that's inside the individual. It's not determined by something outside the individual. And I'm not saying anything that isn't obvious to anybody that understands anything about marketing. One of the gurus in the marketing field that anybody who's taken a course in marketing will know, Chathair, is sort of often quoted. And just to show that the sort of things I'm talking about, when I talk about the heart and the spirit, or what's inside oneself, or using Peter's term earlier, or a lot of other people use terms like values, that you can see that the logic, what has changed since I was young, was that companies no longer in many ways sell products. You can see that it's not about the function. It's moved from, you can see on the right hand side, make the world a better place. You almost start with the idea that how do I contribute in some way to humanity? How do I make the world so much better? And it's out of that the business grows. And again, that I took another sort of survey of some sort from Bhaile about food. And again, for people in this room, you probably know these things better than myself. You can see I picked out some of the terms they're using. The consumer trends about, I'm looking for products and brands that are real. Again, this word real or authentic and honest, because I can trust. You can see the sort of terminology. Or down further, you see sourcing a need to deliver unique or distinctive product attributes, or celebrating tradition. Again, going back to what I said at the beginning about the value being not in many ways in the physical, but in the intangible, in the thing of that has to do with the heart rather than the head. And again, I mean, a lot of people talk about China and how wonderful and there's great markets in many ways. But anybody who's been to China knows that quote at the beginning, which I took from the New York Times, is so true. Because the country has grown so fast, there is great value now in something that in many ways is being lost. So in many ways, the thing that is the most valuable is oftentimes the thing that you sort of, it's really in a sense looking to the past to create something for the future. So in many ways, I kind of tried to show in that little diagram at the top, or sort of the philosophy that I'm trying to get across today, or that I've spent many years working on and talking about and researching, which is that belonging, having a sense of belonging, going back to that word of being, or we're as human beings, of belonging somewhere, having a sense of being in a distinct place, in a special place, in a place that's not better than anywhere else necessarily, but is different and distinctive, and that has something special. And the relationship between me and that place is of great importance. In fact, I saw an ad for the GA on the way in, and it talked about belonging. It used the word "where we belong," and it showed the little kid with a hurley. And that's really what I'm talking about, that sense of belonging somewhere. And as we become more global, and a lot of the people, for example, who move from one country to the other, it's their new home. They want to have that sense of belonging to somewhere that's different, that's unique. This is where their heart is now. And you can see the relationship that from that sense of belonging comes meaning. And out of that comes, again, against the orthodoxy which sees economic growth as the objective, out of that comes a thriving or flourishing economy and society. In many ways the reverse of the old way of thinking, which was that was good for the world. In many ways, the way we look at it in the old days was if humans were doing well, then the world is doing well. Because of climate change, because of loss of biodiversity, etc., we actually have to think the opposite now. It's what's good for the world is good for us as human beings. We thrive when we're in a place where we belong and has meaning. And you can see how I linked together my businessy stuff in the middle. By the way, each of these has a story. I'm not going to go through them all, but I wanted to pick out, there's a couple of French examples there. I picked out one from the website at Ockley. I'm not sure if they're here, but just to show that. But the one on the right-hand side, which is probably the one that's least, that you can least see, I thought it would be nice to have something that has a connection with myself. And why I'm showing this is because it shows the sort of value of even something indicated in Irish for a foreign market. And the reason the one on the right hand side, you can basically make out Finbarr and then Tuberine. That's actually the company Stonewell that makes cider in Cork. And I gave a talk a few years ago, and they came to me and said, we've just broken into the French market, and we'd like a more Irishy name. I gave them a whole bunch of names, and they ended up choosing my own name actually as the brand for the French market. And it was I who actually, you can see it says Tuberine, which is, they wanted, because it was low alcohol or no alcohol, they wanted a word that captured that, and so I gave them the word Tuber, the Irish word for well and being small, so Tuberine. So I just wanted to show you that in many ways that it's no disadvantage. In fact, it's a great advantage to be competing in global markets with something that is different and distinctive. The best example of this, I think, is this Inish man on the Aran Islands, which you can see there's two companies that are linked together in some way. They make these very high fashion sweaters, competing against top-line Italian fashion designed clothes in Milano and in Japan, Saks Fifth Avenue, etc. So at the top, they're at the very top in the quality area, competing against companies from, as I said, Italy and countries with an established reputation in fashion. And yet here's a company on the Aran Islands, 15 or 20 miles off the coast of Ireland, able to compete in a market like that. And the reason they're able to compete in that market is because the people who are buying the product are not actually, in a way, buying a sweater. In the old way of thinking about a sweater, when you go to a Marks and Spencer's, whatever, you buy something that has no meaning for you. Going back to what I said about meaning, it was made somewhere, probably sells for $20 or $30 or euros. These sell for 300 or 400 euros. So why are they able to get 300 or 400 euros for them? Well, again, going back to what I said about design, etc. But it's more than that. It's because of the meaning that the sweater has, who made it, where it comes from. I was speaking to somebody from Japan who was very enthusiastic about this company, and that's what he was saying to me, that it wasn't because of the link with necessarily that they knew that the Aran Islands was an Irish-speaking island, but that they admired the pioneering spirit of people who were competing against these forces, against global forces that are so difficult to compete against. and trying to at the same time maintain something that meant something. So it meant something to the Japanese person who wears something. That link between the sweater he or she puts on their body and the person who made it and where that person comes from. I see the same thing in craft. When you see a piece of craft, it is, again, it's not the physical that's important, it's the relationship, the meaning that the craft has for the person who has it in his or her home. So, and to show a survey that points this out very clearly in the Irish market about Irish, that you can see more than 70% of the people who saw a name in Irish or a title in Irish associated with authenticity, with the fact that it had something to do with a sense of identity, a sense of that relationship I pointed out between the person himself or herself and the thing that they're buying. So to conclude, I took this is my second last slide here. As a person who teaches finance, I used to teach a lot of finance. One of the big flaws when you teach about money is that you're always looking to the future, as if the past is irrelevant, unless there's value in some way in terms of tourism or whatever. But in fact, I think it's a flawed way of thinking. And you can see, I took this from The Economist, or this quote from The Economist at the bottom, that sometimes the best way forward is backwards. And a lot of the products at the bottom, whether it's wristwatches, which were going out of business 20 or 30 years ago, more wristwatches and fountain pens are sold now than ever before. And we know the story with vinyl records. So to conclude, I was trying to think of how would I give some sort of value to wrap this up. And I tried to capture it in two sort of quotes or things I saw in books or articles. And the first one was about meaning. The reason I have this little Apple logo next to the person's name is because the person this Kawasaki, was the designer in Apple at its early days. And you can see that what he's saying is pretty much what I've been trying to say today. There is really only one question you should ask yourself before starting a new venture: do I make meaning? And he goes on to say, meaning is not about money, power, or prestige. It's not even about creating a fun place to work. Among the meanings of meaning are: make the world a better place, increase the quality of life, right a terrible wrong, prevent the end of something good. And the second quote I took from a business publication. Again, this is what the logic of where the world is going, I believe. That the old way that I started off talking about today, the old way of thinking was, how do we make something and ship it or get people to buy it? I try and get across to my own students that I think, I'm not saying that the world has completely changed, I'm sort of saying that in many ways we're moving to what is in that second question here, which is, when you think about yourself, who am I, where am I, why am I, and how do I live a good life? Then I think the second question is very relevant, which is, whatever my calling is, whatever my product or service is, how do I really serve human beings? How do I serve them in a deep way? And out of that, I'm utterly convinced, having spent all these years, as I said, studying these kind of things, that you will be very successful because you are serving that thing deep inside all of us, that thing that we all want, which is explained, I think, in that formula. So, Múineann Fionnbarra Ó Brolcháin.